So despite Nigel now, well, after this election, he is going to fade into obscurity. There's no two ways about it. Even though, as I've said last time we covered this very subject, don't count him out for account. But there are a lot of people now saying this in increasing volume. This is just from the New Statesman. Nigel Farage's last stand. In a working men's club in Nottinghamshire, the Brexit Party leader looks exhausted. He's fighting what looks certain to be his last general election, but will he come to regret it? Nigel Farage is touring the working men's clubs of Northern England, like a comedian in disgrace. I mean, the Brexit Party leader in the bowels of the Bricknet Colliery Miners Welfare Social Club on the outskirts of Kirkstall in Ashford. We are deep in Nottinghamshire coalfield, where Farage has chosen to launch what he promises will be his last general election campaign. The bar around us is dimly lit and empty, but for his security detail. He slouches, almost bent double, on a table in tweed and mustard cords, dangling with brocades dangling from a couple of feet below the floor. Farage's day, the first of his tour of the Labour constituencies which voted to leave in 2016, has been long. It started in a boxing club in Bolsover, Dennis Skinner country, over the border in Derbyshire, a Labour majority. A walkabout in Mansfield Town, a Conservative majority of just over 1,000. Now in Ashford, a Labour majority. He waits to address his paying faithful. They are packed plentifully in the upstairs room, listening to a considered speech on the constitutional reform, the Brexit Party chairman of Tim Rice. Yet, they are really here to see Farage, who, for all their dedication to try and snab a day for a photo with Farage, now looks openly exhausted. His party is divided, its polling numbers on the slide. In Westminster, the Tory Brexiteers accuse him of conspiring to hand the general election to Remainers. In the back of the bar of Brynneck, it is cold and dark. Farage, who has declined to make an eighth unsuccessful attempt to become an MP, is pintless for the first time ever. Can he really be enjoying this? The question seems to flick a switch. He breaks out of the glum response, and on comes the feline grin. "Oh, I always have fun," he says with a throaty laugh. "So far today, I've had forced upon me lunch, fish and chips, cake, beers." His fingers waggle illustratively. But does he really want to be here? I suppose that I'm a bit surprised that I'm having to do it, when it should have been done and dusted by now. I shouldn't even have been involved, really. But I do think it's important that we do it when I come to places like this, to remind people of the sheer extent to which Labour have broken their promises. Upstairs, genuine locals are hard to come by. Many have driven upwards of 50 miles to spend their Thursday evening in Farage's company. Others are regulars, trailing him from drafty hall to drafty hall, pit town to faded seaside resort. Farage's spiel, with his later rehashes on the stage upstairs, is familiar. Quote, "I want to point out that Boris deal is just not Brexit. It's a Remainers Brexit. It's a half in, half out, and half in Neverland. Unless the Tories get through and they want to change things, which at the moment they're not doing." He explains his defiance. The reason for being here is to say to people, well, in a general election you deserve to have a choice, and that's important. So clearly there are 4 distinct courses here on his menu, and we're going to provide one. Clearly there are many things Farage would rather be doing, all of them better paid than politics. Once this is over, he hopes to campaign on other issues, the Constitution, educational reform, and head to America. Now, I wonder why he wants constitutional reform and why he wants education reform. Constitutional reform, I certainly agree, but I definitely wouldn't probably not agree with anything that Farage would certainly suggest, because anything he would suggest would certainly be an attempt to try and put the right wing in power indefinitely, which, once again, should this ever happen, and I'm sure we'll discuss it when the time comes, that this is what the right wing of this country is going to try and do. Make sure that they are in power indefinitely and that nothing can challenge them. Again, you don't believe me, take a look at the ID voter laws that are coming in. Bearing in mind, last time there was a general election, only one person was arrested for this. And I don't even think they were charged for it. So yeah, voter problems. Not an issue in this country, despite how sometimes the right wing like to make it a thing. I want to be a commentator. I want to broadcast. I want to write. I want to lecture. Clearly, current affairs is my livelihood, but a career in politics isn't. It's not my ambition. Says the guy who tried to be an MP, 7 times, 8 times? He's an MEP, but barely is even there. Again, he's out on this campaign trail. He should be in Europe doing his job, but he's not. I've always tried to use my MEP position or party leader position as a means of shifting opinion and moving things. I've had some success at that, some failures too. And this is, once again, what we've had to discuss. Farage and UKIP were always a vehicle to try and push the Tories back into more Thatcherism, back into more really hard right policies. You've only got to look at their years gone by manifestos. They've always pretty much been a copy and paste of the Tory manifesto, just with more hard right focus on their politics, because that's what they've wanted to do, and that's what they've been quite successful in doing. Try and push the Tory party from being going towards a more centrist point of view, sort of a centrist right party, back to a very hard right party. And Farage with UKIP has had success at that, so I will credit him on that. But is this really what people want? It's not really. But I do want to be sitting in the House of Commons. But do I want to be sitting in the House of Commons in 15 years' time? He cocks an eyebrow. Likely not. None of the biggest influences on America, on the American right, he contends, are on Capitol Hill. More of them are on telly, their radio shows, their blogs, their podcasts, all the rest of it. I see myself more in that role, to be honest, and hopping back and forth across the pond. Later, parts of his address to the rapturous crowd upstairs sound almost like a concession speech. Changing the British political system with its power, its patronage, and its money is not an easy thing, he says. Perhaps one can help but think that's why he's leaving the stage. For Farage, the complaints of the conservative Eurosceptics are cutting no ice. Could I, in good conscience, after 25 years for fighting for this and having helped personally to move a few hills, could I stand aside and let this thing be sold without standing up and saying it's wrong? I couldn't do that. But what of the consequences? In Mansfield, 3 or so miles away, Conservative MP Ben Bradley worries what a Brexit Party surge might do to his slender majority over a Labour Party promising a second referendum. Here in Ashfield, it could dash Tory hopes of victory. These are the seats that will give Boris Johnson his majority. Or, if his worst fears about Farage are realised, deny him. Yes, Farage does a decent job of at least sounding unrepentant. I would respond to this split the vote thing by saying 2 things, really, he sighs. First is that you can't split the Brexit vote if there is one real Brexit choice. And again, this is another thing that we've been saying all along about what Leave tried to do, was they tried to sell every single Leave option except a no deal. And then, when it's come about, all they have to do is say Brexit means Brexit, leave means leave, and then they can suddenly, without having to put pen to paper, say what they want and get people to vote for what they want without them having to read it. This is why Theresa May's deal failed. This is why Boris Johnson's deal will fail. It's not what people want. It's not what people voted for, because as we've said again last week, the DUP are an ardent group of leavers, but for some reason don't like the deal that allows them to leave the European Union. The ERG wants to leave the European Union, but didn't vote for the leaving option that Theresa May presented to them. So he chuckles incredulously. The second thing, of course, is that we're straight back, for me, in my head, in the 2015 general election. I led UKIP and I faced exactly the same questions from exactly the same people. The exact same criticism in the Tory press that I've been getting for the last 3 or so days. And of course, on the night of the result, they were all wrong. Why? The answer, given our location, is obvious. Because the UKIP 4 million did far more damage to the Labour Party than it did to the Tory Party. No, it didn't. The UKIP has always been a Tory problem. UKIP, bear in mind, has never pulled any, well, at least any credible evidence that it has pulled any votes away from a Labour seat for them to lose it. It did far more damage to the Labour Party than it did to the Tory Party. I think right now the most vulnerable vote to the Brexit Party is the Labour Leave vote. Absolutely, there are Conservatives going to vote for us. Of course there are. In confidence in Boris and if so-called deal collapses, even more Tories will come. But right now, I think it's much easier for Labour leavers to vote for us. Bear in mind, that ain't going to happen. You've seen, if you haven't been paying attention, especially in local newspapers, Brexit Party MEPs are getting absolutely ripped to shreds in hustings. Why? Because all they're promising is Brexit, and they can't even keep the same line on Brexit. So there is no consistency in their voice between MPs. There is no unified, uniting message between what their main, source is putting out, let's their Facebook, Twitter, whatever you name it, is putting out, versus what their MEPs are saying, what they want and what they put out. In fact, this is quite funny. The Rotherham hustings, they have like this like a pre hustings, and the Brexit Party guy turns up. Everything apart from Brexit, he agreed with the Labour guy. I kid you not. I don't know if there's footage. I'm gonna have to try and find it, but needless to say, that will be fun to try and find if I can try and find it. I'm sure there was someone with a camera there. Might have to track them down. But yeah, anyway, back to the article. So, some Tories wholeheartedly agree with him, even if academic studies don't. You see? Others, however, are convinced that Farage can only do them harm. If he is wrong, then the result would be haphazardly parliamentary coalition capable of mustering a majority for a second referendum. Or worse, Nigel Farage's final act in British politics would have been to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory he has so coveted for over 3 decades. For no reason his detractors within and without of the Brexit Party say, other than his own vanity. And that's exactly what it is. It's a vanity project for him. It always has been. He is haughty, impatient and dismissive of the likes of Steve Baker, the European Research Group chairman, who once advocated a pact with Farage. He has since concluded any cooperation would be unworkable, tweeting daily entries of Farage's surrender. It's pathetic. I saw it all at Maastricht. I saw the same game played over Maastricht. The rebels all up all night filibustering as they were then allowed to do in the House of Commons, and then in the end they all voted for it. It's the same with this lot, and I'll be astonished by it. I'm astonished by Boris. I'm astonished by Jacob Rees-Mogg. I'm astonished by so many of them. Behind the bluster is an open door. Farage drops his voice to a conspiratorial stage whisper. It's interesting, isn't it? Here we are sitting on the 5th of November. Nominations close on the 14th. Many things may move. I don't know any more than you do. Things can change in the next 9 or 10 days. I don't I don't think they really were serious until they saw our candidates. Bear in mind, they're candidates, exemplary candidates, one who thinks she's an alien from space. Yeah, and that's the constituent for Central Leeds. And again, there are many, many more who, again, when put to scrutiny, you wouldn't vote for them in a month of Sundays. I don't think, though, they were really serious until they saw our candidates standing up cheering in that hall in Westminster yesterday. The point about general elections is that you press the reset button. Don't tell me it's a Remainer parliament, because we haven't got a parliament. This is a chance to change that. I don't buy that the Tories can shift their stance on policies because we're moving into an election, and that's the argument I've been pushing over and over for the past week or so. Rather than peering over the ledge into an oblivion, he has his foot on the top rung of a ladder, ready to climb down, provided, of course, that his big condition is met, a commitment to no deal in the Conservative manifesto. The Prime Minister, Farage insists, is completely capable of doing so on a 180 on where he is now. I think the logic of what he is saying in the general election is that you can press the reset button. Otherwise, why have elections? It's quite a powerful argument. It is an argument that's convincing Johnson, though. Indeed, the only certainty in this election campaign appears to be the Tories with persistent in ignoring it. What then if the worst happens? Will Farage campaign to save Brexit, any Brexit, in a second referendum? Were Johnson deal or anything softer pitted against Remain, Farage could only foresee one winner. Remain wins every time. Back goes his head every time. I wouldn't vote. What's the point? Farage would encourage his fans, like the 100 or so waiting in the room above us, to boycott the poll. He inhales wearily. I just think I'd head for the hills. This isn't Brexit. It's never going to be Brexit going down this route. One cannot help but wonder if Farage has made his disappointment and that of the voters he claims to represent inevitable. I asked him to consider one of his heroes, Enoch Powell, unlike Powell, who implored his followers to vote Labour in an intervention that was widely credited for delivering Harold Wilson victory in February of 1974. Farage is endorsing nobody except himself, but might his campaign have the same effect? I hadn't really thought about that, he says. He recalls the moment Powell took to stage in Shipley, West Yorkshire, and told an audience of anti-common market activists to vote for Wilson's Labour government as it promised referendum, only to be accused of treachery by a heckler. It's the famous Judas, isn't it? Judas was paid. Arms outstretched, he mimics Powell, nascent West Midlands pirogue. I am making a sacrifice. I hadn't thought of it in quite that way, he said, although I don't think Powell ever regretted it. He pauses. I don't think Powell ever regretted it because he really had broken his 1970 manifesto promise, which was to enter the European Economic Community with the wholehearted consent of the British people, which clearly hadn't been given. It had, considering the result of it. So Powell never regretted it for one moment. He gazes across the room. Ozzy Osbourne stares back from a battered canvas. No, I shan't regret this at all. And I that's kind of interesting, because that's Farage's point of view of this whole thing. And indeed, it is quite interesting to know what he's going to do, and that's basically that Farage isn't really going to go anywhere. He's just going to become a quote unquote commenter, because that's where the money is for him now. It's no longer in being an MEP in politics and being a member of UKIP and trying to push the Tories for more hard right policies. That's not what he wants, because now they're all in charge. They're all in power. They're all in. They're controlling the seat of government. So in a way, he gets what he wants, but we now have, and I said, in all the seriousness, just seriously, don't vote Tories. If you want Brexit, then vote for the Brexit Party. Send a message to the Conservatives. But as predicted, is Yorkshire going to turn blue? No, not in the slightest. The idea that these towns and cities that have been betrayed continuously, that is remembered to this day, in working men's clubs, they are never ever going to forgive or forget what the Tories did to this area. So they will never ever in a month of Sundays vote Conservative.